She always got more, Mom declared. Barely glancing up from the gourmet cupcakes she was carefully arranging on the tiered stand. Sophie has always been the one who hits the books hard. You've got too many side interests, she said dismissively. Those words cut deeper than any slap ever could. I stood in our family kitchen, my freshly framed medical school diploma in hand, trying to wrap my head around what I'd just heard. But Mom, we both graduated with honors. We even had the same GPA. My tone stayed calm, even though my hands trembled slightly. I just don't get it. You and Dad covered every bit of Sophie's loans, but not a cent for yours, Emily, Mom finally said, her familiar look of mild disappointment washing over me. Sophie has a well-connected mentor like Dr. Carter backing her future, while you've always had to fend for yourself. You've had advantages that she hasn't. I almost laughed bitterly. Dr. Lauren Carter had become my research advisor because I'd earned that spot through countless 80-hour weeks in the lab, while Sophie was off skiing in Aspen with our parents. I was left to work myself to the bone, and yet she got all the support. My twin sister received our parents' unwavering emotional and financial backing, and now it felt like I was being penalized for finding my own mentors. Am I really being punished for that? I asked, fighting to keep my hurt from showing in my voice. My dad walked in, casually putting an arm around Mom's shoulder. No one's punishing you, Emily. We're just being realistic. Sophie needs extra help, and you've always been the one who manages on your own. They used the word resourceful to justify why I never showed up at her undergrad research presentations while jetting off across the country for her volleyball tournaments. And why, when Sophie got a new car for her 21st birthday, all I got was a gas station gift card. The next day was Sophie's debt-free celebration party. Our parents' idea, of course. They'd invited extended family, her friends, and even some of our former professors. The invitations read celebrating Sophie's achievement, as if graduating debt-free was solely her accomplishment rather than a financial decision made by our parents. I need to get going, I said, gathering my bag for my early hospital shift the following morning. Will you still come to Sophie's party? Mom asked, her concern more for how my absence might impact Sophie's special night than for me. I'll be there, I promised, though the thought churned my stomach as I headed out. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Carter. Need to talk urgently about the Patterson Fellowship. Big news. I stared at the screen as a chill of realization spread over me. My parents' favoritism wasn't just unfair, it was about to be exposed in a way that would leave me humiliated, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Sophie and I had been on very different paths since birth. According to family lore, I arrived first, and she followed 6 minutes later. I was always the quiet, observant one, and she burst into the world with a loud, healthy cry, a pattern that seemed to set our futures. Growing up in Cleveland, Sophie was the outgoing twin, making friends easily and excelling in sports, while I was the introverted one, spending hours in the local library learning about everything from astronomy to zoology. Our parents were at every one of Sophie's soccer games and dance recitals, while my science fair wins only earned a quick "good job, Emily," and a pat on the head back in high school. When we both decided to study medicine, they were thrilled for Sophie, but for me there were constant concerns about whether I could handle the pressure. Medical school isn't just about smarts, Emily, it's about grit and determination, Dad warned. And indeed, Sophie always pushed herself harder. The irony stung as I maintained a perfect GPA at Ohio State while working part-time to pay my own way, whereas Sophie struggled with subjects like organic chemistry and physics and got expensive tutors, or even exclusive MCAT prep courses when she needed to retake the exam. When I scored in the 98th percentile on my first try, they only said, "That's nice, dear." Even so, I never stopped loving Sophie, despite everything. She was my twin, and I knew she never intentionally sought our parents' favoritism. It was something she just benefited from. Sometimes I even wondered if she felt awkward about it, though she never said so directly. We both got accepted to the same medical school in Michigan, and for 4 years we studied together, supported each other through grueling rotations, and celebrated every success. I thought that maybe, at last, our parents would see us as equally accomplished. Instead, They kept finding new ways to spotlight Sophie while downplaying my achievements. When I was selected to present my research at a national conference, Sophie coincidentally received an award for community service that same weekend. And guess which event our parents attended? But everything shifted in our final year when Dr. Carter, a renowned neurosurgeon, noticed my research on pediatric traumatic brain injuries. Under her mentorship, I finally flourished. For the first time, I had someone who truly recognized my potential and pushed me to excel, not in spite of my personality, but because of it. "You have a real gift for research, Emily," Dr. Carter once told me. "If only your parents could see the way I do." The morning before Sophie's celebration, I met Dr. Carter in her office, a striking woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Her office was decorated with awards, published papers, and photos with top figures in medicine. "Sit down, Emily," she said, motioning to a chair. "I have some amazing news." My heart had been racing for weeks as I awaited word about the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, the most prestigious neurosurgical research position in the country, awarded to only one graduating student nationwide. "The committee has made its decision," Dr. Carter said with a measured expression. I held my breath. "They've chosen you," she announced, breaking into a broad smile. "Congratulations, Dr. Emily Roberts. You're headed to Baltimore." Joy, disbelief, and validation crashed over me in waves. I stuttered. I don't know what to say." "You earned this," Dr. Carter said firmly. "Your work on neurovascular regeneration after trauma was groundbreaking. They were especially impressed by your innovative approach that mixes surgical techniques with smart use of medications. The fellowship includes a generous stipend, housing, and best of all, complete loan forgiveness. You'll be debt-free, just like Sophie, but on your own merit, not because of parental favoritism." Before I could fully absorb the news, Dr. Carter added, "I've been invited to Sophie's celebration tonight. Your parents sent the invitation as a courtesy to faculty, unaware of our mentorship. I'd like you to announce the fellowship news there, if you're comfortable with that." My stomach dropped. "I'm not sure, Dr. Carter," I said. "It's supposed to be Sophie's night, and my parents might think I'm trying to steal her spotlight." Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed slightly. "Emily, I've observed your family dynamic these past 2 years. I've heard what your parents say at hospital events. I understand your hesitation, but sometimes you have to claim your recognition publicly to force people to acknowledge it." I nodded slowly. "All right, you can say it," I conceded as I left her office. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Sophie. "Mom's overdoing it tonight. It's embarrassing. Wish she'd put in as much effort celebrating both of us. See you there." I stared, confused. This was the first time Sophie had ever mentioned our parents' unequal treatment. Before I could reply, another text came from Mom. "Don't forget business casual tonight, and please let your sister have her moment. It's very important to her." The contrast between the messages was jarring. Perhaps I had been wrong about Sophie all along. Maybe tonight would finally reveal truths my parents had hidden for 26 years. Sophie's debt-free celebration was taking place at a fancy restaurant in downtown Detroit. Our parents had rented out an entire rooftop terrace, a lavish expense, no doubt. When I stepped off the elevator, a large banner greeted me. "Congratulations, Dr. Sophie," with no mention that there were actually 2 Dr. Roberts in our family. I smoothed down my navy blue dress and took a deep breath. This was supposed to be Sophie's night, no matter what Dr. Carter planned to announce. I wasn't going to let years of resentment ruin our relationship. Sophie immediately broke away from a group of relatives to come over. She looked stunning in a silver cocktail dress, her blonde hair cut in a trendy bob, while mine remained long and perfectly styled. "Thank God you're here," she said. "Aunt Linda's asked me 5 times if I have a boyfriend yet." I laughed, despite my nerves. "What did you tell her?" I said I'm married to medicine. "But if you know any eligible neurosurgeons, I'm taking applications." Sophie linked her arm with mine, though she looked a bit serious. "This is ridiculous," she murmured. "Mom invited half the medical school. Dean Parker's even here." I scanned the crowded terrace, and sure enough, the dean was chatting with our dad. They really went all out, I thought, feeling mortified. Sophie lowered her voice. Why just for me? We both graduated and worked our tails off. My stomach twisted a little. Maybe Sophie understood more than I'd thought. Mom appeared with a glass of champagne in hand as she announced, Sophie, Dr. Henderson just arrived. Remember Thomas Henderson, the chief of surgery at City Hospital? You should go say hello. With that, she separated us, then glanced back. Emily, could you check if the caterers have set up the gluten-free options? Cousin Beth's being picky about her diet again. And just like that, I was stuck managing the catering while Sophie was paraded in front of hospital administrators. Some things never change. While I was busy directing staff to the right table, Dr. Carter arrived in a sharp crimson pantsuit that commanded attention. Emily, she greeted warmly, giving me a hug. Are you ready for our announcement? I admitted, I'm not sure. The timing feels off. Dr. Carter surveyed the party. The banner, the elegantly decorated cake with only Sophie's name, the slideshow that featured Sophie prominently with me only in passing. I understand, she said softly. It was more complicated than I'd thought. Across the terrace, I watched our parents introduce Sophie to Dr. Fiona Adams, the chief neurosurgeon at Detroit Medical Center, where both Sophie and I had applied for residencies. My heart sank. Were they trying to secure Sophie a spot through family connections? Just then, Dad approached with Mom and Sophie in tow. What an honor to have you join us, Dr. Adams. I see you've worked with Emily as well, he said. Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow. Emily has been my main research partner for the past 2 years. Her work on traumatic brain injuries has been key to our study. Our parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. Sophie has also been active in neurosurgical research. Dr. Adams was just saying how impressed she is with Sophie's residency application, Mom added. I felt a surge of anger. Sophie hadn't focused on neurosurgical research at all. Her interest lay in neuropsychiatry. My parents were clearly misrepresenting her experience, and it was hurting my own opportunities. Dr. Carter kept her smile polite, though I noticed a steely glint in her eyes. Really? I was under the impression that Sophie was aiming for psychiatry rather than surgery. An awkward silence fell over our small group, and I felt the walls closing in. The announcement was about to make everything worse. Dinner began with our parents sitting at the head table alongside Sophie, our grandparents, and Dr. Adams, while I was placed at a secondary table with cousins and family friends, close enough to hear, but too far to join in. We had always known Sophie was destined for greatness. I overheard Dad telling Dr. Adams that even as a little girl, Sophie had shown such determination. Every word felt like a tiny dagger. I pushed my food around, my appetite gone. Nearby, Dr. Carter exchanged sympathetic glances with other faculty members. Once we'd been served, Dad stood up and tapped his glass. Thank you all for coming to celebrate our daughter Sophie's incredible achievement. As you know, medical school is a grueling journey, and graduating debt-free is truly something special. The crowd applauded politely. Sophie looked increasingly uncomfortable. We're blessed to have supported Sophie throughout her education, Mom added as she joined Dad. I stared at my plate, tears welling up as I realized the message was clear. They'd invested in Sophie, not in both of us. Actually, Sophie suddenly said, standing up, I'd like to say something. She looked directly at me, her eyes apologetic. This celebration feels incomplete. Emily and I both graduated with the same honors. We both worked insanely hard, but I know you had to do it without the same support system. A hush fell over the room. Our parents looked stunned as Sophie bravely pointed out the imbalance. Dad quickly recovered, his tone overly cheerful. Of course, we're proud of both our girls. Emily has done very well, too. But tonight is about celebrating Sophie being debt-free, which is a special achievement that you helped make possible, not something Emily earned. Sophie spoke firmly, and the tension in the room was palpable. It was clear the carefully constructed narrative our parents had built was starting to crumble. Sophie looked at me with genuine care, and then Dr. Carter stepped in. If I may add something, she said, her voice clear, I'd like to share some news about Emily that many of you might not know. Our parents exchanged worried glances. Emily's research on neurovascular regeneration has earned her the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Carter announced. There were gasps and murmurs throughout the room as Dr. Adams looked at me with newfound interest. My cousins whispered excitedly. The selection committee specifically praised Emily's innovative dual approach, developed mostly on her own while juggling a full rotation schedule, Dr. Carter continued. The room erupted in genuine applause as people turned to look at me, smiling and nodding in admiration. Our parents remained frozen, shock and dawning horror on their faces as they realized that their carefully crafted story was falling apart. Sophie beamed at me. There was not a trace of jealousy in her expression. "Congratulations, sis," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "The Patterson Fellowship. That's amazing. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I only found out this morning," I replied softly. "I didn't want to overshadow your celebration." Sophie frowned. "This party is ridiculous. It was Mom and Dad's idea, not mine." I tried to explain that it was unfair to both of us, but Sophie interjected, "I know they always treat us differently. I just didn't know how to fix it without making everything worse." Before I could respond further, Dr. Fiona Adams came over. "Dr. Roberts," she said, addressing me directly, "I'm really impressed by what Dr. Carter just said about your research. We should talk about whether you'd consider joining our neurosurgery department instead of heading to Johns Hopkins." I blinked in surprise. "That's very flattering, Dr. Adams, but I've already accepted the Patterson Fellowship." Sophie quickly added, "Just so you know, my sister never does just one groundbreaking thing at a time. I bet she'll have another major project up her sleeve within months in Baltimore." Dr. Adams smiled warmly. "When you're done with the fellowship, keep Detroit in mind. We'd be lucky to have you." She nodded at Sophie, and after she walked away, I looked at Sophie in amazement. "You didn't have to do that. I know you wanted to stay in Detroit for your residency, and I still can." Sophie replied, "But I won't let Mom and Dad manipulate things or hold you back from opportunities. That's not who I want to be." Across the room, I saw our parents finally rising from their table and moving toward us, hesitantly and slowly, interrupted by guests eager to talk about me, a novel and clearly unsettling experience for them. "Here they come," Sophie murmured. "Ready for this?" I admitted, "Not really." When our parents reached us, Dad carefully calibrated his tone to sound proud, masking his confusion. "The Patterson Fellowship is quite an honor," he said. "Why didn't you tell us you were even being considered for something so prestigious?" Mom's voice carried a note of accusation. "Would it have mattered?" I quietly replied, "You've made it clear whose support matters." Our parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "It's not fair, Emily," Dad began. "We've always supported both of you differently." Mom quickly interjected, "We supported you differently because you had different needs." Sophie shook her head and said, "Mom, Dad, let's not do this tonight. We'll have a real talk about everything soon." She gave me a meaningful look, silently saying no more pretense. Just then, Dr. Carter appeared at my elbow, rescuing me from having to say more. "The dean would like a word about featuring your fellowship in the alumni magazine," she told me, smiling pleasantly at our parents, though her eyes were steely. "You must be so proud to have raised two such accomplished daughters, though I imagine it feels especially gratifying to see Emily's hard work recognized after all she's overcome." Mom's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "We always knew Emily was special too, just a bit too late." The week after the celebration, the news of my Patterson Fellowship spread throughout Detroit's medical community, and suddenly doors that had been closed to me swung wide open. Former professors who'd given Sophie extra time but denied me opportunities were now emailing me congratulations. Classmates who barely acknowledged my existence during our 4 years in med school suddenly claimed close friendship. Meanwhile, our parents were busy trying to salvage their image. They showed up at my apartment the day after the party with gift bags and forced smiles. "We've been thinking," Dad said as he placed a small box on my coffee table, "with both of you graduating and starting your careers, we should get you something special." Inside was a rose gold watch, identical to the one they'd given Sophie for her birthday 6 months earlier. "It's lovely," I said, not reaching for it. A bit late, though, Mom flinched. We know you sometimes feel overlooked, but everything we did was because we thought you could handle challenges on your own. Sophie needed more support. That's a convenient excuse, I replied steadily. It still doesn't explain why you showed up at her presentations but skipped mine, why you paid for her MCAT prep courses but told me to rely on free online resources, why you covered her living expenses during med school while suggesting I take on more loans. We only have so much money. Dad protested. We had to make choices. Yes, you did. I agreed. And you always chose Sophie. Mom's eyes filled with tears as she insisted, we love you both equally. Maybe you do, I said quietly, but you haven't treated us equally, and watches and belated praise won't change that. Then the phone rang, Dr. Carter calling about my upcoming move to Baltimore. I answered gratefully, turning away from my parents' stunned faces. Yes, I'm available to discuss housing options. In fact, your timing is perfect. 3 weeks later, I stood in my nearly empty apartment. NT, boxes packed, and ready for the movers. Sophie sat on the windowsill, watching me tape up one last box of books. I still can't believe you're leaving next week, she said. Detroit won't be the same without you. Your residency will keep you so busy you won't even notice when I'm gone. I teased, though the truth was, after med school we'd been inseparable, and now our paths were finally diverging. Mine to Johns Hopkins and hers staying in Detroit. I keep thinking about what Mom and Dad did, Sophie said suddenly. Or rather, didn't do. All these years, I thought I was the lucky one because they paid more attention to you, I admitted, sitting beside her. But really, they were holding me back, making me depend on their approval. Sophie sighed. I should have spoken up sooner, she said. They're devastated. Mom keeps crying about how you must hate them, and Dad's telling everyone how his brilliant daughter at Johns Hopkins practically funded your research. Let them talk, I said, surprised by how little it bothered me now. Their approval no longer defined me, and the constant ache for validation from parents who never truly saw me had finally eased. Dr. Carter's mentorship had shown me what genuine support looked like. Someone who pushed me when I needed it, defended me when I was vulnerable, and always saw my potential without conditions. So, what now? Sophie asked. Well, I said as I took her hand, we both find our own way forward, without the competition they forced between us. I'd like that, Sophie smiled, squeezing my hand. Dr. Emily Roberts, Patterson Fellow, I'm so proud of you, sis. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The road ahead would be challenging, but it was mine to navigate on my own terms.